Good morning, grandchildren. Here's story number 5, one of my favorite stories. I used to go up to Portland, Maine to play with the Portland Symphony Orchestra back in the 70s and 80s. It's a wonderful orchestra and a wonderful conductor, Paul Vermel, back then. And on this occasion that I remember so wonderfully, their guest soloist was the entire Duke Ellington band with the Duke conducting. And of course, I was very young and pretty much classically trained and knew very little about jazz. I had no idea what a privilege it was to have him as our soloist. At any rate, the first thing that happened was that one of his trombone players got sick and flew back to New York. And they asked for a volunteer to fill that chair from the trombone section. Well, I am kind of fearless when it comes to that kind of thing, jump at the chance and so forth. And so I volunteered, and they put me in that chair behind that little cardboard stand. And I looked, and there was no music whatsoever, none. And so I had to fake my way through the entire series of things that they did with the orchestra. Mostly I just played the stuff with the bass and, bum, 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 And to give the Duke credit, at the end, he gave me a solo bow, which was wonderful. At any rate, but that's not the great story. The two things happened. The first thing was that when the Duke started conducting the orchestra, the full orchestra with the jazz band, he stood in front and sort of went, huge. And Paul Vermel came out and said to him, Mr. Ellington, sir, you probably don't need to do that much physical activity. The orchestra guys can count in the orchestra, believe it or not. So it's good. And so he left off that. And it was pretty wonderful, but before the concert began, we saw a terrifying thing happen. Cootie Williams, the great trumpet player in the orchestra, and Mercer Ellington, Duke's nephew, were in a dressing room back, and they got into an argument. And they both had in their hands straight razors, and they were saying to each other, "I'm going to cut you, man. I'm going to cut you." And we were all standing around in horror, wondering what terrifying thing would happen. And suddenly they just put their razors away and went out and sat down the band. And to this day, I don't know whether they were serious, they were really angry at each other, or they were doing that just for us white musicians to impress us, which they certainly did. At any rate, the performance went very, very well. And the Duke gave me a solo bow, which is pretty hilarious considering how little I really contributed. But it was very generous of him. And to this day, in my resume, I put down, played with Duke Ellington, which I did. I sat in that chair, even though I didn't make a huge contribution.